we're going to peel back the layers on one of the biggest mysteries of the COVID-19 pandemic, our own genetic blueprint. In this explainer, we're taking a deep dive into why some people got critically ill while others, well, barely noticed a thing. We'll be focusing on two key genetic players, HLA and ACE2, specifically within European populations. I mean, this is the question we all asked, right? You saw it yourself. How could one person have what felt like a mild cold, while their neighbor, maybe someone of the same age and health, was fighting for their life in the ICU? We knew things like age and pre-existing conditions were part of the story, but they were clearly not the whole story. This incredible range of outcomes told us something much, much deeper was going on. And you know where that something was? It was looking right back at us in the mirror. The answer pointed inward, to our own unique biological wiring. So we're going to investigate that genetic blueprint and try to understand exactly how our own DNA might have dictated our personal risk.
To really get a handle on this, you got to look at two fundamental systems. We're calling them the two pillars of vulnerability. First, how does the virus actually get into our cells? And second, once it's there, how does our body fight back?
All right, so let's meet our two main characters. On one hand, you have the HLA system. Think of it like your immune system's intelligence agency. Its job is to find evidence of an intruder and present it to the special forces, your T cells. And on the other hand, you have the ACE2 receptor. This is literally the doorknob on our cells that the virus uses to unlock and get inside. Okay, so when everything's working like it's supposed to, the HLA system is this beautiful, elegant process. The virus gets into a cell, right? The cell immediately chops up the virus's proteins into little fragments. The HLA molecule then grabs one of these fragments, takes it to the surface of the cell, and basically waves this giant red flag that screams, "Hey, invader over here." This is the signal that activates our T cells to swoop in and destroy the infected cell. It's a perfect internal security system. But what if that security system has a weak spot? This is where we run into something called permissive alleles. These are basically specific versions of HLA genes that are, well, just not very good at their job. They're like a security guard who's asleep at his post. He doesn't recognize the threat, so he just lets the virus slip right by without ever sounding the alarm. And the research really started to zero in on one particular culprit, a gene called HLA-DRB108. This specific allele, it turns out, is a huge risk factor. And just how huge are we talking? In one study of high-risk Italian patients, just carrying this one allele was linked to a doubled risk of getting infected in the first place. And for those who did get sick, it was significantly correlated with mortality. That is a massive deal. And get this, we actually know why. This wasn't just some random statistical link. Scientists used computational models to see what was happening at a molecular level. And it turns out this version of the HLA molecule is physically the wrong shape. It literally can't grab onto the key pieces of the virus to show them to the T cells. So if you can't present the evidence, the alarm never goes off, and the immune response is crippled from the get-go. And it's not always just about one weak link. Genes are often inherited together in these bundles called haplotypes. And researchers found entire sets of genes that could make you more susceptible, showing a strong link to getting sick and dying. But they also found protective haplotypes that did the exact opposite, giving some people a real genetic advantage. Okay, so that covers the immune response side of things. But remember that second pillar we talked about, the point of entry? Because while HLA was all about the fight, the ACE2 receptor determines how easily that fight even has to start. And just like with HLA, your specific genes matter here too. Certain genetic variants of the ACE2 receptor actually change its physical shape, making it way stickier for the virus's spike protein to grab onto. It's like upgrading the connection from a flimsy piece of masking tape to industrial-strength superglue. So how much stickier are we talking? Well, the science gives us a number. One variant increases the binding energy by 7.6 kilocalories per mole. Now, that might not mean much to you, but in the world of molecular physics, that is a massive advantage that makes it incredibly easy for the virus to latch on and just not let go. And this is where it all comes together to create a perfect storm. What happens when you combine that super glue-like entry point with a security guard who's already asleep on the job? You get this synergistic failure. The door is way easier for the virus to open, and the security system inside is compromised from the very start. It's a double whammy. Because when those first lines of defense completely fall apart and the virus just starts replicating like crazy, the body's response becomes chaotic. The conflict turns inward, and it leads to this cascade of dangerous consequences: molecular mimicry, innate immune sabotage, and of course, the infamous cytokine storm. Okay, first up is this bizarre thing called molecular mimicry. Think of it like immunological identity theft. Your body trains a T cell to recognize and attack a piece of the virus. But what if a protein in your own body happens to look really similar? Well, that T cell can get confused and start attacking your own healthy tissues. It's basically friendly fire on a cellular level.
And would you believe which gene is right back in the spotlight? Yep, HLA-DRB1/08 again. It turns out this is a dual risk allele. Not only does it make you more likely to have a bad time with COVID, but it's also already known to predispose people to autoimmune diseases like MS and lupus. It's just a devastating 1-2 punch.
The next problem? It's even more like straight-up sabotage. In some people, for reasons we're still figuring out, the body creates antibodies that attack its own first alarm system, these critical proteins called interferons. When your first responders are taken out of the fight before it even begins, the virus gets a massive, unchecked head start. And if you need a smoking gun, just look at this data. It's absolutely stunning. Over 10% of patients who had life-threatening COVID had these self-sabotaging autoantibodies, and in patients with mild or no symptoms, basically zero. The real kicker? In one big study, 94% of the patients with these autoantibodies were male, and the rate went up with age. This starts to explain some of those major vulnerability patterns we all saw.
And finally, we get to the part you've probably heard of, the cytokine storm. At this point, the fight isn't targeted anymore. It's just pure chaos. It's the body's desperate, over-the-top, and ultimately self-damaging attempt to compensate for all those earlier failures. It just floods your system with inflammatory signals, leading to massive damage and total immune system burnout.
Right. The cytokine storm is essentially the body's excessive damaging attempt to compensate for its failed initial defenses. It wasn't able to control the virus early, so now it throws everything it has at the problem, but in a chaotic way. It's characterized by an excessive production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemical messengers, most notably interleukin-6. And we can actually trace this tendency toward hyperinflammation back to the genetic background we've been discussing. If we look just beyond the highly variable HLA system for a moment, there appears to be another common, widespread genetic factor contributing directly to those damaging IL-6 levels. It's a specific variation in the gene for IL-6 itself, the IL-6-174G allele. This specific G allele, located in the promoter region of the IL-6 gene, is associated with increased production of the inflammatory IL-6 cytokine. People with the G allele tend to make more IL-6 when stimulated. Its prevalence is significant. This allele is very common in European populations. Frequencies typically range from around 55% to 65%. This high prevalence points towards a widespread genetic background in this population that is, you could say, permissive to the very cytokine storm syndromes that unfortunately find so much of severe COVID-19 mortality.
It sounds pretty grim, but here's the thing. Understanding the problem is the first step to finding a real solution. Let's pull all these threads together and see how decoding this genetic risk could totally redefine medicine. And this is it. This is the whole story laid out right here. You start with an initial genetic state, like having one of those permissive HLA alleles. That leads to a failure to control the virus early on. That allows for a super high viral load, which then triggers a destructive, chaotic immune response and ultimately results in severe disease and, in some cases, death. You can see how every single step is connected. But here is the most crucial takeaway of all of this. This knowledge is not a destiny. It's not a death sentence. Knowing a patient's genotype, their specific genetic risks, changes everything. It lets us move from a one-size-fits-all approach to true precision medicine. We can monitor high-risk people more closely, use specific treatments proactively, and step in before that perfect storm ever has a chance to form. It turns a fixed vulnerability into a powerful opportunity. When you get right down to it, the baffling differences in how people experience this disease weren't random at all. Our susceptibility and the severity of the illness are profoundly shaped by our own genetic history. And understanding that history, that is the key. It's how we're going to build the personalized strategies we need to protect ourselves against whatever threats come next.